Hi folks, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Payal and I am a traveler who also loves to meet people. And I think a blend of both is where this concept of melting pot has come about. In my Melting Pot series, I will be talking to lots of inspiring people from different parts of the world and also from different cultures, whom I meet during all my travels. The common factor between these folks will be the desire to follow their passion and make it a way of life. So step into this melting pot and enjoy the chats. Hi listeners, welcome to another episode of Melting Pot, a series of conversations with very diverse and passionate people from across the globe. My guest today is Justin Fu. Justin has 14 years experience in food and beverage, and he's also a content producer. So I'm not going to add anything else to this. Let's just hear Justin's story from the man himself. Hi, Justin.
Hi, Payal. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm so honored.
Thank you for finding the time. And, I'm also really excited to hear your story. Where did it all begin? Were you always someone who had a passion for food? Just love to hear it all.
Sure, so let me take over.
Yeah, good idea. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah. All right. So, you mentioned that, I'm a chef and also a food content producer. So a lot of times people get confused. So what am I doing? So my usual answer is I'm doing everything. But, my love really stems from food. So whatever I do on screens, I do the same thing on a plate. And that's what that's my tagline, right? So I compose screens and I also compose plates. And it all stems from this obsession with food. And that actually was more of I would say half nature and half nurture. It's because I grew up in a family of chefs, of people who love food. My uncle, he was a hawker selling prawn noodles in Tanglin Halt. And he was quite famous, and he was there for like 40 years. Unfortunately, he has passed on. On my mom's side, my grandfather was a chef. And my grandfather met my grandmother at the restaurant. So it was one of those situations where one in the kitchen and one in the dining room. And then they met, and then they fell in love. And 2 generations later, me happened. Yes, and I think what's more relatable to me was about my dad, because he loves to eat. He's someone who I used to be a really fat kid, so he was responsible for that. We moved over overseas as well. You mentioned yourself you're a traveler, so I think you also understand, when you go overseas, the first thing you want to do is to discover.
Yeah.
And the best way for me to do it was through food. So I discovered American food because I was in Austin, Texas for a while, and that really made me balloon up.
And American food can do that to people, right?
Exactly.
Because it's food in plenty,
yes,
the portions are so large, and at the same time, a lot of it is fried and
a barbecue is
barbecue,
so good.
Yeah,
could use some right now.
But you just mentioned to me that you've just come to see me after.
Full wonderful person I just met recently. He's from Iran, and he does. He's a 3rd generation caviar producer. So caviar, for those who don't know, they're really the first few fishes that did these eggs that's really expensive and in a tin and nice and salty, briny and creamy. Those originate from Iran, and he's a 3rd generation.
And he lives in Singapore.
He lives in Singapore,
okay.
And he does many other things. So outside of caviar tasting, I also had some Armagnac.
Ooh.
And fancy.
This is totally fancy. And then you walk into my podcast interview. Excellent. So I think we're going to hear a lot of interesting things today. Yes. Coming back to your dad and you living in Austin, Texas, and so you got used to American food, and that's when you said you gained weight. So you were influenced because your dad, you said, was a foodie. So moving on from there.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess food never left my mind, and to today, especially coming after such a intense and wonderful brunch, I would say. And then came to the point where it was one of those milestones where some people go through a lot of trials and everything. For me, it was my dad who passed on when I was 15. So already that love for food was just ingrained in me because he used to travel a lot, and sometimes he spend time overseas and we'll be in another country. So what I really looked forward to was all the dinners that we had together, or rather supper, because he comes back like 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and then we go out and eat. So upon his departure, I thought, what should I do? I want to honor him. He was in marketing, he was in the silicon industry, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something that celebrated his life. So it was always about the interactions that I had with him, all over food. So I thought, okay, since he liked to eat, why not I cook? So, under certain stress in that circumstance, one would be able to make a life decision quite easily. So ever since I was 15, I told myself, okay, I want to be a chef. So upon graduation, O-levels, which I did not bad, right? I came from a neighborhood school, and they were very upset that I didn't go to JC because I affected their data and score points. So I sent the principal's office, had the talk. But no, I said, I want to do food, I'm going to do food. So at 16, after my O-levels, I went to my very first job. It was in a cafe, and I wanted to get my hands wet. My legs really, really wet and knee-deep into what I was going to do. Because I told my mom and she wasn't convinced. Coming from a chef family, there are a lot of troubles that they went through. My grandfather had mental illnesses, so he actually succumbed to it much earlier on. So my mom naturally had this aversion to say, hey, it's really tough. Are you sure you want to be a chef? I said, yes. So why don't I try? And I'll let you know how it goes. So into my second day of that job at this cafe somewhere in Harbourfront area, I shall not name what, just this particular chef. And this was in 2006. I was 16.
And that's the year I moved to Singapore.
You did?
2006, yeah.
Wow, okay. So it was a very different time back then.
It was, yeah. I think between 2006 and today, Singapore has... I find that with food, there's so many more choices now. There's so many more restaurants, different cuisines. There's a lot of experimentation that's happening around food, which is why people refer to Singapore as a melting pot.
Exactly.
And it's like my podcast series. So it's clearly a lot of diverse cultures, which and also within Singaporeans, the ethnicity and how everyone kind of blends in and lives together, which is like a melting pot. It's the diversity, but also I feel that there's a lot of different food that has come in, and I think food is most definitely a binder. It's something that talks to you, so I do see a change in Singapore in that sense,
I feel, I always say that food is like a conversation you have without words. It's a message you want to send over to your diners, or a conversation you want to share with someone without having to say anything. And in 2006, the conversations were less as compared to now. And right now it's really an open market. I love it. I love how we have progressed, and how we can see that our food is diverse, but also the people that we see in Singapore is really diverse. The type of people that we have.
Absolutely.
As well. Somehow it's weird. It's correlated. But anyway, back then, right? In 2006, my second day of work, it was a lunch crowd. I was on the sandwich station, and we were serving this. I don't know. Out of the sudden, it's like the whole office block wanted to go down and have our sandwiches, right? It's as if they knew that I was there. I'm just kidding.
Justin has arrived.
And it was just a nightmare. And I remember I stood there and froze. I didn't know what to do. And orders were just stacking up and stacking up. So the chef, he was a Singaporean, trained by a Hong Kong chef, and landed himself in a Western cafe, So obviously there's certain things that he has learned. And the way of disciplining me was to use a heavy Chinese wok ladle and to smack it against my forehead to ask me to wake up.
Wow.
And I did wake up then, right? So I was bleeding slightly, but I didn't really feel pain because I was just so wrapped up in the moment, and this thought went through my mind: do I want to quit now because I have all the reasons to, or do I want to continue, prove to my mom that I'm okay with this, and I will get over this? So I got over it. I just said yes, chef. I just did whatever I could and whatever I was able to, and just soldiered through the night and through the afternoon. And I think from there I gained some sort of footing in the adult world. And I knew how to navigate it slightly, because I think back then for any 16-year-old they expect you to just quit. They're really just pushing the limits and saying that, okay, this is not for you, go home. And I didn't want that. I wanted to say I'm here to stay. So that translated already when I was my passion for food and wanting to be a chef translated already when I was 16. And then we fast forward to after my army, I went to Canada. I did my chef school, and I think the experience in Canada was really another life-changing one, because this is when I learned in a pristine environment how to be a chef, how to cook. What are the techniques? What kind of people that you're going to meet with? And it was a place where I could really extend my creativity. But then again, I was living alone. It was my first time living alone. And it was a lot of things to handle. And, outside of managing your own pursuit of your career, I also realized that there is also this management of self and how to be okay by yourself. Because I basically just uprooted my whole life in Singapore. The friends I've made, the people I know, they were no longer there, and I was like halfway around the world, different time zone. And after a while, you also realize that people move on, and you gotta be okay with that, especially when you're doing a job this intense. And that's when I learned. Of course, I went through a little bout of slight depression, but I learned how to manage it.
And which part of Canada were you in?
This was in Ottawa,
the coldest
capital. Not the coldest, but also very cold. It was minus 40.
And then I think, even though you did mention that you lived in Texas, but I think if you get used to the Singapore weather and then you get thrown into that kind of minus 40 degrees, it can be it's cold.
It is
literally
very cold.
And even otherwise. I can understand your loneliness then.
You have moved around as well.
Yeah.
And I think for you draw strength from a change in environment.
Yeah.
But for a 19, 20-year-old guy, what goes on in most Singaporeans' mind is, I want to hang out with my friends, right? That assumption was no longer assumed because I have no friends. I have to make friends, and this is something that we do. We are so, set in motion. We grow up in the schools, and we are already surrounded by a fixed group of type of people. But then suddenly, the races of your friends, or this new group of people that you're seeing, is different. The language they speak is the same, but the accents are different, and the nationalities are just so diverse. But again, I loved it. I loved it, but sometimes I just miss the touch of home. Yeah, and it was my first time living alone. So anyway, I got over it. I managed pretty well, and it just made me a person I am today. Because after that whole experience, I'm someone who can just travel overseas and make a ton of new friends. Because it's like, I've done this before. Why not? Again, it's nothing.
Yeah.
But I don't have that freedom yet, because after school I came back and I worked, and I worked in fine dining restaurants. The most prestigious one I worked at was the one who got 2 stars recently before they closed, and then I moved on to working at other fine dining establishments, managing team, moving up the hierarchy. So I always say I'm always very proud of the fact that when I was 24, I was the head chef of Senso, which is an Italian fine dining. And at that point of time, right, in 2014, no guys my age were having this role, especially for a Singaporean, because no Singaporeans want to do this job. They're all like, they run away and do something else. They figure that I cannot deal with this stress. So I was very proud of myself for doing that. I had a ton of training, ton of experience that led a team that was made out of Malaysians, Singaporeans, and also a few Europeans. But I came to realize that times were changing as well. You know, how I learned was the hard way. You know, I got bashed in the head, and I received that vaccination. You know, after that, I worked with this very tough to work with chef. I work with Andre, and he is an artist, and certain artists are very eccentric. He is no exception. But I did learn a lot from how he thinks and how he creates, and just how he moves and navigates this whole life of being a chef. And still, I learn and I practice some of the things that he taught me until today. And I think, you know, learning is always prevalent in any stage of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't stop learning ever. Yeah, that's true. And you persevered, and so obviously that determination in you to succeed is quite commendable. You know, you could have, despite sort of going through all that you did in terms of the hard work, in terms of getting whacked in your, the second day of work, you still pushed and you pushed and you pushed because you really, really wanted to prove a point to your mum also.
Well, of course, and to myself.
And to yourself that you can do it. And I think anything is possible. If you put your mind, your heart and soul into it, it's possible to achieve. So, so I mean, today you are I know you've mentioned to me in the past that you don't like the word celebrity, but you still are a celebrity chef.
I would rather call it a food personality, a chef personality.
A chef personality. Yeah. I know you did mention it to me before our conversation, but so what is the kind of work that you're doing now? You're listening to a fusion of stories recounted for the first time ever by some fascinating people from across the globe with me, Payal, on this very unique and special podcast series, Melting Pot.
I guess when, from all those times, all those years working in the kitchen, I stepped into this food content and also being a food content producing and being a chef personality is because I wanted to speak out for us chefs, essentially, and especially for the food that us Singaporeans do. So what do I do as a chef personality? I do, of course, I still cook and private dinners. I cook for TV. I cook for some online channels as well.
So what do you do, like live cooking?
I do live too.
You do live as well.
But most of the time I do like pre-recorded, in the studio, or, advertisements if they need to. It's either I'm on screen or I'm producing what's on screen. Yeah, because I do food, so I know
so you
how
your
food affects the soul, and
absolutely,
how when you see it, you can see an egg yolk running down the side of the textured rice. It can be very, very sensual, and I think it takes a chef to know.
Completely, I totally agree with you, and I think food, yes, the taste, but also visually. If it's not appealing, I think it's a mental thing where you get put off.
Yes.
So that's
especially now, right? In Instagram age and digital age, people eat with their eyes first. They decide with what's online before they even go into reviews. If they don't see a good plate, they don't even bother the reviews. So capturing the eyeballs is very, very important.
Yeah.
And that's why I do what I do. I don't just work on myself as a chef personality, but I also help other chefs. Some of them I get it. When they hit either the quarter life or midlife crisis, they start to question where they're going in the industry, and they want more for themselves. And I think every chef, those who have made some success, has a story, and just needs to be encouraged. And how I encourage is just to listen to them and to make a video or make a story out of them. And from there, they're very, very proud of themselves, because I'm just there to build the story for them based on what they've given me. And then they will,
I guess they can't communicate enough.
Exactly.
And does that then motivate them again to continue to do what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they are very excited to share about their craft. all of a sudden because they have a good piece of media asset to put out there.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's very important for people.
Yeah, and today I think that's the most important thing. People are just out there because there are so many platforms available for people to actually showcase what they do, which otherwise probably in 2006 was not possible.
Exactly.
So I think you have to go along with the times.
Yeah.
And you did mention that you're doing some research and you're producing content revolved around
the hawkers? Oh, yes.
Yeah, so tell my listeners more about that. Firstly, I think a little bit, for those who are not familiar with Singapore, and the whole food court and not so much food court, because food court is available where you have them all over the world. Yeah, it's commercialized. But the hawker centers are very typical of Singapore.
That's right.
So if you could just share a little bit of the history of the hawker centers and what it is that you're doing with them now.
Right, so it's a bit of a backstory about where hawkers began. Right, some of the listeners might know that there's this whole debacle about hawker culture being not Singaporean but actually Malaysian. To me, it's the same thing. But why is it particularly important that it happens in Singapore is how we started and where we are today. How we started was really just folks who want to make a living on the streets, on the side of the road, having some charcoal fire, cooking for their friends, and then they tell their friends, and then suddenly they are a fixture on this road, like our Hokkien mee, the fried Hokkien prawn noodles. Before it was called Rochor mee because all the folks along that road, on Rochor Road, were selling this kind of noodles.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I had no idea. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then now, so that's why our Hokkien mee stems from what people know as Rochor mee. In Malaysia, the Hokkien mee stems from something else. It's really like Hokkien people or something. But a hawker in general is someone who sells food for a living, right? And they, one day they decided to just clean up the streets. So all the hawkers on the streets, no longer. You don't see that anymore in Singapore. They're all in really well-maintained, well-cleaned centers, which anybody can bid for, and anybody can be a hawker as long as you're a Singaporean, or I think PR also can. I'm not so sure. Don't quote me on that. But it's really a good opportunity for people who love food to try out their hand in business, to do a trade that is not different from way back in the 50s, 40s, which is just a cash transaction of food from the services you offer, right? I cook, you pay for what I cook for. And I think that's the beauty of it, it's very simple. Now, the story now stems from who the people are, where they come from, and what's so special about these hawkers in Singapore. I think in Singapore we do it so well that we have a good mix of all the races, different kinds of cuisines, and you see really all age groups going to the hawker centers, and no matter how rich or poor you are, you know that you can go back to the hawkers to get any cuisine you want in Singapore for a really affordable price. And that's why I think hawkers in Singapore do it very well, because I sit down and I see the interaction between people. It's just so beautiful. The uncles are always there. Some of them 8 a.m. they start drinking beer. Life ambition. Then we have also the kids, who sometimes follow their parents or their friends. So it's a very social space for every age group and every race.
An affordable social space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think, when I was in my teens, a young adult, I don't want to go hawkers, because it's hot, uncomfortable, and not cool. But as we grow older, I think we come to realize that we need to keep this part of what's us, Singaporean. So that's why I've been documenting hawkers in general, because to have the traditional taste of a good hawker fare that was present in the 1940s to 60s or whenever they started, is very hard to find now. A lot of things are industrialized. A lot of hawkers buy from food manufacturers. They no longer make it by hand. And before these folks, retire, I want to make sure I've documented it. So my food content...
So are you saying that the next generation is not wanting to do what they're...
Yeah,
they're not inheriting these stalls. They don't
it's
want
a tough
to.
job. It's a tough job, and it's more often than not thankless. And if I tell you, if you can be an IT consultant that makes $25,000 a month, as compared to you can make the same amount, but you have to work every day without any rest from morning 4 a.m. all the way to evening 7 p.m. Do you want to do that?
Can you really make $25,000
Oh gosh.
with a hawker stall?
Sometimes more if your food is good.
Yeah.
You can. It's a cash business, right? So it's also quite known that for all those well-to-do hawkers who have good recipes and good consistency, the cars they drive are really impressive. They are like Mercedes or BMWs and Audis, and they can afford things because it's really a fast-moving cash business. But again, it's tough work. Not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody wants to dedicate their life to it. So I mean, not even me. I don't think I can do the same thing. But what I can do is I dedicate whatever I do to make sure there's a record of these people.
It's archived for the future. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because as from what I understand, what you're saying is that the next generation or the current generation and the generation after will probably not be interested or in sweating it out at a food stall and making money, where they can have an education and go and sit in a corporate environment in air conditioning, and or they could also own restaurants that are not just stalls, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have to progress with times.
Yeah.
The usual questions when I ask my hawkers, then when I interview them, is how do you start? Most of the time is they have no other choice. They have to make a living. And right now in the situation, the next generation or generation after, usually they don't have that question in their mind. Nobody thinks that, I have to make a living, so I become a hawker.
Yeah.
So the starting point will be, okay, I've made a living. Maybe I'm done with that. I'm done with being a banker, or I don't want to be a fund manager anymore. So I made my wealth. So I would just do what I want to do, which is food, right? And that's okay. That's okay to have that passion as a starting point, right? And if you wanted to be a hawker and sell nasi padang or nasi lemak for the rest of your life, why not do it? As long as someone is doing it, I'm happy, But the next few stories that we're gonna have after will not be the same as what we have right now, and these are important to keep for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think there has to be that legacy which it goes down as, again, archival and as something that people can always refer back to. So it's a part of the culture, I think.
It is.
Yeah, and for it, and the fact that the different ethnicities that make up Singapore are all in there and cooking their type of food and then sharing it. And also it's an experience. I mean, the rather upmarket hawker center, for example, would be like a Lau Pa Sat, which is a very touristy kind of place as well. But that's where it's like, and the way it's been created, it is something which tour guides, or I'm sure in the different platforms, that talk about Singapore, they have Lau Pa Sat as a hawker center to go to. So that's some sort of, it defines a bit
Singapore.
of the culture. Yeah, exactly.
And the thing is, Singaporeans would go to Lau Pa Sat.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not like something that is specially curated for tourists. It's not real. So I mean, it's just one of these things where it's very accessible to anyone from around the world to discover Singapore. Like the first thing you do, go to a hawker center.
And anyways, I think food is normally the first thing that people want to understand, other than all the touristy, typical spots. I think food is something which people do like to know more about, especially in Asia. I think there's so much variety which is quite fascinating, and Singapore has a lot of that. So I mean, it offers the different types of Asian food, plus obviously whether it's European, it's Peruvian, it's whatever, it's all here.
I like how you mentioned that it's all here. And the thing is, to listeners out there from anywhere around the world, when you come to Singapore, be excited about the choices here. But I challenge everyone to dig a bit deeper. Why is Peruvian food here? Or like in the sudden influx of China's Sichuan food has picked up so much from the past 10 years. Why is that so?
And Spanish, I've noticed.
That too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to understand the food trends of Singapore, you also understand Singaporean people. You come to know that, what are we really excited about? And what are the things that we all share? So for example, maybe a Spanish person who's tuning in, you know that your food is slightly spicy, very earthy in terms of spices. And we have that too in Singapore. So that it's a great way to open conversation as well, right? If we both like spicy food, we can discuss so much about it. I can give you an itinerary where to go for all kinds of spice, from the Indian spice to the Chinese spice to the Malay spice to the Spanish spice, which they adapted Singaporean styles to serve Spanish food. So dig a bit deeper, listeners. So listen.
Listen.
A lot of things you can discover about food.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, food it's incredible how it just brings people together. It's, you talk food, you taste, it's the flavors. It's like you said, food is also a conversation starter. So that's interesting. Thank you so much, Justin.
My pleasure.
I've learned so many different things talking to you about Singapore, despite
you've been here for quite amount of time, right?
Yeah, although I did go away for 5 years and then came back again, so this is like my second stint. But I'm always discovering. It's interesting that if I went away for a few months and I came back, I would see a new restaurant or a new area suddenly developing with a lot of energy, a lot of different kinds of food, restaurants, bars, and then I'd say, but 5 months ago it didn't exist. So I think that's what makes Singapore exciting, because it's just ever evolving. And
we have a lot of passion, and we have a lot of people who have very expensive hobbies. Not complaining for consumers, but
and I think it's also therefore an interesting place for people to want to come and live for a few years, because earlier it used to be Hong Kong, but now it's clearly Singapore, and and all the effort that's going into it, I think is quite fascinating, and there's always something new to learn, which is what I really like about being here. And obviously I've enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you for sharing your story with the listeners and with me.
Thank you so much.
It did not feel like I was meeting Justin for the first time. He was as curious to hear my journey as I was to hear his. I like the way he refers to himself as a personality chef and not a celebrity chef. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have bringing it to you. Do stay tuned for a lot more exciting episodes on Melting Pot with me, your host, Payal.